A critical moment in global politics. What we're witnessing right now might be one of the most significant developments in the Middle Eastern geopolitics in decades. In a recent interview that sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles worldwide, former President Donald Trump made startling revelations about ongoing military operations involving Iran. His statements weren't just political rhetoric. They represent what could be the opening chapter of a major confrontation between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran. The interview covered multiple explosive topics: a massive naval fleet reportedly en route to Iranian waters, intervention to stop hundreds of executions, the destruction of Iran's nuclear capabilities, and, surprisingly, the possibility of diplomatic dialogue. Each element demands careful examination to understand what's really happening and what it means for the future. The Armada, understanding the military buildup. The scale of naval power. When Trump uses the term Armada to describe what's heading toward Iran, he's not being subtle. The word itself evokes the Spanish Armada of 1588, one of history's largest naval fleets. Trump specifically stated that a massive fleet and a big force are currently moving toward Iranian waters, intended to monitor Iran's activity. Hundreds of targets simultaneously, carrying Tomahawk cruise missiles, surface-to-air missiles, and anti-submarine weapons. The strike groups would also include cruisers providing additional air defense, attack submarines prowling beneath the waves, and supply ships supporting the entire operation. But Trump didn't mention just one strike group. He mentioned an armada, suggesting multiple carrier groups, possibly amphibious units carrying Marines and strategic bombers positioned at regional bases. Strategic purpose and positioning. This deployment serves multiple purposes beyond simple monitoring. It's primarily a show of force designed to send an unmistakable message. When you position tens of thousands of personnel, hundreds of aircraft, and thousands of missiles within striking distance of a nation, you're communicating both capability and intent. The surveillance mission would involve constant reconnaissance flights, signals intelligence gathering, satellite coverage, and subsurface monitoring. Every military installation, government facility, and movement of Iranian forces would be tracked and analyzed. But the real purpose is deterrence, establishing what strategists call escalation dominance, where you have such overwhelming force that any adversary knows escalation will be met with disproportionate response. The geographic challenge. The Persian Gulf presents unique operational challenges. It's a relatively small body of water, approximately 615 miles long and 200 miles wide at its widest point. The Strait of Hormuz, within which the fleet must operate, is only 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. This constrained environment creates what military planners call an anti-access area denial environment. Iran has spent decades preparing to fight in these waters with thousands of mines, shore-based anti-ship missiles, fast attack craft, and submarines designed for shallow water operations. Approximately 21 million barrels of oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz daily, about 21% of global petroleum trade. Any conflict here would have immediate and severe global economic consequences. The execution crisis. 837 lives in the balance. The human stakes. The most dramatic element of Trump's interview was his claim of personally intervening to stop the scheduled execution of 837 people, mostly young men, that was supposed to occur on a specific Thursday. According to his account, he issued a direct warning: if these executions proceeded, the United States would hit Iran harder than you've ever been hit. This threat apparently convinced Iranian authorities to halt the scheduled executions. Iran's record on capital punishment. To understand this intervention's significance, we need to examine Iran's use of capital punishment as political control. Iran consistently ranks among the world's top executioners, second only to China in absolute numbers, and first per capita. International human rights organizations document that Iran executes hundreds annually, many for drug offenses, but a significant number are politically motivated. The execution of young men has been a pattern following major protest movements. After the 2022 protests sparked by Mahsa Amini's death in police custody, thousands were arrested and many sentenced to death in what observers called sham trials. The slogan, "Woman, Life, Freedom," became a rallying cry for millions of Iranians demanding fundamental change. The regime's response was brutal. Thousands arrested, hundreds killed during protests. The 837 individuals Trump mentioned were likely connected to these movements. The scheduled mass execution would have been one of the largest single acts of political repression in modern Iranian history, sending a chilling message to anyone considering resistance. How American intervention works. How does an American president intervene to stop executions in a hostile foreign country? In this case, Trump described a direct threat of military action, the most severe form of diplomatic pressure. The effectiveness depends on credibility. Iranian leadership had to believe Trump was both willing and able to follow through. The Armada's presence would certainly add weight to such threats. This intervention raises complex questions about sovereignty and American power. Critics argue the United States has no legal authority to dictate Iranian judicial proceedings. Supporters counter that preventing mass murder of political prisoners represents exactly the moral imperative that justifies action, especially when preventing harm rather than causing it. The broader pattern of oppression. The scheduled executions weren't isolated incidents, but part of how the Islamic Republic maintains control over an increasingly restive population. Iran's government faces a fundamental legitimacy crisis. Public opinion shows that large majorities of Iranians, especially young people, oppose the current system and want fundamental change. The regime's response includes comprehensive surveillance, internet shutdowns, deployment of paramilitaries, and a climate of fear designed to prevent organized resistance. Targeting young men for execution is particularly strategic. They represent the demographic most likely to sustain resistance movements. Organizations have documented systematic torture to extract false confessions, show trials lacking due process, and execution as political control rather than criminal justice.
The nuclear peanuts warning. The most alarming claim. Trump stated that a potential new strike would make the previous destruction of Iran's nuclear facilities look like peanuts, noting the previous U.S. strike was a total obliteration that took Iran's advanced 10-year project out of play. If accurate, this represents one of the most significant military operations in recent history and a fundamental shift in the Iranian nuclear situation. Understanding Iran's nuclear program. Iran's nuclear program began in the 1950s with American assistance when the Shah ruled Iran as a close U.S. ally. After the 1979 revolution, the program continued but became controversial as evidence mounted of weapons development capabilities. The key concern has always been uranium enrichment. The same technology for civilian reactors can produce highly enriched uranium for weapons. In 2015, Iran reached the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, with major world powers. This deal imposed strict limits on Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for sanctions relief. Iran agreed to reduce enriched uranium stockpiles by 98%, limit centrifuges, and allow extensive inspections. Trump withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018, calling it a bad deal, and pursued maximum pressure sanctions instead. Iran responded by gradually breaching limits. By 2025, Iran had accumulated uranium enriched to 60%, near weapons grade, operated prohibited advanced centrifuges, and reduced inspector cooperation.
Assessments suggested Iran's breakout time to produce a weapon had shrunk to just weeks. The strike's scope. If Trump's claimed strike occurred, it would have required extensive planning and coordination. Iran's nuclear infrastructure is distributed across multiple hardened sites. Natanz, Iran's primary enrichment facility, buried under concrete and earth, housing thousands of centrifuges. Fordo, an enrichment facility built into a mountain under an estimated 300 feet of rock, specifically designed to resist conventional attack. Arak, heavy water reactor site that could produce plutonium and alternative weapons path. Isfahan, facility for uranium conversion into gas for enrichment. Parchin, military site suspected of nuclear weapons design research. Successfully striking all these would require hundreds of aircraft sorties, advanced bunker-busting munitions, extensive air defense suppression, precise intelligence, and simultaneous coordination across dispersed targets. The peanuts implication. Trump's claim that even this comprehensive destruction would look like peanuts compared to a potential new strike suggests several possibilities. Iranian capabilities have been rebuilt or located, requiring more extensive operations. Future strikes would target broader infrastructure beyond just nuclear facilities, or the language is deliberately hyperbolic to maximize deterrent effect. A critical reality: you cannot bomb knowledge. Even if every facility were destroyed, the scientists and engineers who built the program would retain the knowledge to rebuild. Destroying infrastructure creates delays measured in years, but doesn't eliminate fundamental capability if political will to rebuild exists. This is why purely military approaches have limited long-term effectiveness against nuclear proliferation.
The paradox of diplomacy. They want to talk. Perhaps most intriguing was Trump's claim that despite the military buildup, threats, and interventions, the Iranians want to talk, and the U.S. is open to dialogue. This reveals a fundamental truth. Military pressure and diplomatic engagement aren't necessarily contradictory. Throughout history, effective negotiations often occur when both parties recognize the alternative is costly conflict. This approach has precedence. During the Cold War, the U.S. maintained massive military pressure on the Soviet Union while engaging in arms control negotiations. Kennedy authorized the Cuban Missile Crisis naval blockade while keeping diplomatic channels open that ultimately resolved the crisis. The theory is coercive diplomacy. Negotiations succeed when the other party understands the consequences of failure. What each side wants. Iran would want from negotiations comprehensive sanctions relief for their devastated economy, security guarantees against regime change, recognition of their regional role and alliances, something concrete to show domestically as victory rather than capitulation, and a framework allowing some nuclear activities while preventing weaponization. The U.S. would seek permanent prevention of nuclear weapons without time limits, ballistic missile development constraints, cessation of support for proxy groups threatening allies, human rights improvements, and robust verification mechanisms. The Supreme Leader question. Trump mentioned remaining coy about whether he wants the Supreme Leader to step down. This coyness is strategic. If the U.S. position demands Ayatollah Khamenei's removal, negotiations aren't possible because the regime won't remove its own leader at American demand. But if the U.S. is willing to negotiate with current leadership, a deal becomes conceivable. Khamenei, 85 years old and in power since 1989, has been inconsistent about U.S. negotiations. He's called talks with America poison, yet authorized negotiations leading to the JCPOA. Like most leaders, he makes pragmatic calculations about regime survival. If military pressure threatens survival, he might authorize concessions he'd never otherwise consider. Domestic politics on both sides. Both leaders face domestic constraints. For Trump, any deal must demonstrably exceed the JCPOA he withdrew from, addressing his criticisms, too limited in scope, lacking permanent constraints, ignoring missiles and regional behavior, giving too much relief too quickly. For Iranian hardliners controlling institutions like the Revolutionary Guard, any deal must preserve core regime interests without appearing as capitulation. They need to claim victory, or at least honorable compromise, not surrender. This creates a challenge. Both sides need to claim success, but if both claim victory, skeptics suspect their leaders gave away too much. Successful diplomacy often requires enough ambiguity that both sides can interpret agreements favorably domestically.
Regional and global context. Iran's regional network. Iran's broader role helps explain why the U.S. sees Iranian behavior as problematic. Iran has cultivated enormous influence through proxy relationships. Iraq, decades supporting Shia political parties and militias, attacking American forces and facilities. Syria, crucial support for Assad's regime, creating a land corridor through Iraq and Syria to Lebanon. Lebanon, Hezbollah, Iran's closest and most capable proxy, with tens of thousands of rockets threatening Israel. Yemen, support for Houthi rebels attacking Saudi Arabia and threatening Red Sea shipping. Gaza, support for Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad fighting Israel. Persian Gulf, attacks on oil tankers, seizures of foreign vessels, creating regional instability. This network gives Iran influence beyond its direct military power, allowing pressure on adversaries and establishing major regional power status. From an American perspective, it represents a fundamental challenge to stability and allied interests. The risk of wider war. The most serious consideration is escalation risk into broader regional war with unpredictable consequences. Iran could strike back by attacking American forces, launching missiles at Gulf states, activating Hezbollah against Israel, mining the Strait of Hormuz, attacking tankers, conducting cyber attacks or terrorist attacks through proxies. Any response could trigger escalation, drawing in Israel, Saudi Arabia, and potentially other powers. The economic impact of disrupted oil supplies would be global. The humanitarian costs of regional war would be catastrophic. International complications. European nations and Asian countries have different interests than the U.S. They depend on Gulf oil, want to avoid supply disruptions, and have preferred engagement over confrontation. European powers invested heavily in the JCPOA and were frustrated by American withdrawal. China has become crucial to Iran as sanctions cut Western access. Chinese companies maintain trade despite American pressure, providing a critical market for Iranian oil. Russia has supported Iran diplomatically and militarily, selling weapons and coordinating in Syria. Both see Iran as a partner in resisting American influence.
High stakes and uncertain outcomes. Trump's interview reveals a multi-dimensional strategy combining overwhelming military pressure, humanitarian intervention, destruction of nuclear capabilities, and openness to negotiation. Whether this approach succeeds depends on complex calculations by multiple actors with competing interests. The Armada represents unprecedented pressure. The execution intervention demonstrates willingness to act on humanitarian concerns. The nuclear strikes, if accurately described, fundamentally altered Iran's weapons timeline. But the ultimate question remains: can maximum pressure produce maximum diplomacy, or does it simply lock both sides into positions they can't retreat from without appearing weak? History provides examples of both outcomes. Sometimes overwhelming pressure forces capitulation. Other times, it triggers resistance and escalation. Iran has shown remarkable ability to absorb pressure over 4 decades, surviving an 8-year war and decades of sanctions without fundamental policy changes. The coming weeks and months will reveal whether this strategy achieves its objectives or whether we're witnessing the beginning of a conflict whose consequences we cannot fully predict.
What's certain is that we're in a moment of profound consequence for the Middle East and global security, where decisions made now will echo for generations. The world watches as this high-stakes confrontation unfolds, hoping that wisdom, restraint, and genuine dialogue can find a path through the crisis that avoids catastrophic conflict while addressing legitimate security concerns and humanitarian imperatives.